Okay. We are taking a look at the first major battle of the Civil War on July 21st, 1861. The Battle of Manassas, or the First Battle of Bull Run. I previously mentioned to you guys that we're going to see a lot of these battles have multiple names. Most battles have two names, Confederate reference or a Union reference. Most Union battles were named after waterways because they didn't change on maps. Most Confederate battles, they named them after the towns. Like 99%, 99% of battles are fought in the Confederate states, and in the South there are obviously a number of battles in the border states, but very few on non-slave-holding Union territory. We'll cover some of those, but this particular battle is the first major engagement. So what we're going to just take a look at are some of the comparative strengths, and I'll just sort of set the tone on what we've got going on here. So the Union troops are under the command of Brigadier General Irvin McDowell. He takes command not too long after Winfield Scott steps down with Fuss and Feathers. He has 5 divisions. These numbers vary, somewhere between 30 to 35,000 troops that are just outside of D.C. I talked about how these troops are starting to roll into D.C. We've talked about one group in particular, the Massachusetts Volunteers, who had marched through Baltimore, and the Baltimore riots occurred in April. Other soldiers are going to come through by way of Annapolis, Maryland. There's a lot of volunteers coming out of Ohio. This particular group under McDowell's under 5 divisions, led by Brigadier General Daniel Tyler, Brigadier General David Hunter, Brigadier General Samuel Heintzelman, Brigadier General Theodore Runyon, and then Colonel Dixon Miles. So this is a little bit more uniform, so to speak, from what we discussed in our last lesson on how the armies are sort of broken down. So this just kind of shows you there's a little bit more organization in Union command at the start of the war, whereas the Confederate troops are under the leadership of General P.G.T. Beauregard, who we talked about from Fort Sumter, and another army under the command of Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnston. Now, keep in mind that Johnston is at Harper's Ferry, Beauregard's outside of D.C., and the purpose for the movement on thanks. Have a good one. The purpose of Johnston's location, obviously they want to hold steady Harper's Ferry because of 3 significant reasons. They control the arsenal, they control strategic high ground, and then they control the convergence of the Potomac and the Shenandoah rivers. It's like setting on a fork in those rivers. Like I said before, highly recommend visiting Harper's Ferry and Antietam. You can do both of those locations in a day. So you have 13 independent brigades under Beauregard and Johnston. So Bonham, Richard Ewell, Jones, James Longstreet, who will become a corps commander. We'll talk a bit about him later. Colonel Koch, Brigadier General Jubal Early, General Holmes, Kershaw, Shanks Evans, Thomas J. Jackson, who's a colonel, will be promoted to the rank of general. He too will become a corps commander as a result of this battle. He'll also, as Kira pointed out before, gets his nickname Stonewall at this particular battle. Colonel Bartow, Brigadier General Bernard Bee, who Kira told you about, gives Jackson his nickname that sticks. General Kirby Smith, and then the cavalry on this day will be led by Colonel James Yule Brown Stewart, Jeb Stewart, who will rise to the rank of general following this engagement as well. So you're looking at two armies, no real division structure. The Army of the Potomac at this period of time is known as the Army of Northern Virginia. Or it becomes renamed the Army of Northern Virginia, and that's going to be led by Beauregard. Keep in mind here, you guys see why they would have renamed this army? That would create some mass confusion, because the Union Army is ultimately going to gain the name Army of the Potomac. The Army of the Shenandoah is led by General Joseph E. Johnston, but what we're going to see is that these two armies after this battle are going to be brought together. So we'll talk more about that here momentarily. So these two forces combined will equal the strength of McDowell, but they're not all on the field at the same time. They're going to have to mobilize Johnston's men starting on July 18th. So let's take a look at Irvin McDowell. He's an Ohio native, West Point graduate, class of 1838. Here we have another brothers type war connection. We've already talked about the fact that Beauregard attacked his mentor and instructor, Robert Anderson at Sumter. Well, now he is clashing against one of his classmates from West Point. He's harassed by impatient politicians, including Lincoln. There's a lot of I don't want to get ahead of myself because we're going to talk about this in lesson 6. There's a great deal of contention within Lincoln's cabinet, and everybody's sort of jockeying for position, and everybody has the best idea of what to do for the war effort. And there are two people in particular that sort of have the ear of Lincoln in terms of like what war policy or how the war is going to unfold, and that's going to be actually three people, come to think of it. Secretary of State William Seward, former Commander Winfield Scott, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. McDowell's he's frustrated and he's nervous because all around Washington from April to July, all these soldiers have mustered and they're training and they're preparing, but he can tell that they're not ready for battle. A lot of them are there for the reasons we talked about before. They're there for adventure, they're there for opportunity, but no one's seen the elephant, so to speak. No one's actually seen battle, nobody's seen warfare. And that's a major concern here for this newly minted commander of a pretty large standing army. So on July 16th, he departs from Washington with the largest field army yet gathered in North America to date. All right, and this is going to be the largest battle to date. Bull Run, but that's obviously going to be eclipsed by a number of horrific battles that are going to unfold in the years to come. So the goal to march on Richmond and to take Richmond. So that becomes the battle cry of the Union Army as they march toward Richmond, on to Richmond. That is a rallying cry that we'll talk about throughout the course. Here we have P.G.T. Beauregard on the left and Joseph E. Johnston on the right. Any Longwood? Anybody got any Longwood graduates in their family or interested in Longwood? Johnston is basically the campus in which Longwood sits on is sort of like Joseph E. Johnston's home place in Farmville, Virginia. So Johnston had Virginia roots. He is the highest ranking officer coming from the Union of anyone else. He was higher rank than Lee, higher rank than Albert Sidney Johnston. Lee was a colonel in the United States Army and then he gets promoted to the rank of general once he takes command of Virginia forces after Virginia secedes. So Johnston is highly decorated, and we'll talk much more about Johnston when we get into lesson 6. So Beauregard is going to draw up his defensive lines along 6 miles of Bull Run Creek. You're probably familiar with this creek. If you've ever driven to Northern Virginia up Route 15, 17 to 29, 17, 29 to 15. Are you all familiar with that area? Basically, if you're driving 95 to Fredericksburg, and you take Fredericksburg, you take Route 17 over to 29, and you drive past Culpeper. This area where sort of present day interstate or highway 2915 meet is the area around Manassas, Virginia, and Bull Run Creek. So, and again, this is another one of those battlefields that I would recommend, if you have the opportunity, go visit. So what Beauregard is given is command of what is called the Alexandria Line. So these defenses are basically organized to hold the Manassas Junction, all right? This railroad junction. And this railroad line, the Manassas line, runs from just outside of Winchester, Virginia, from Front Royal, all the way down to Manassas. So this is a major railhead that is not directly in between, but it is closer to D.C., but it is in between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia. Beauregard's got about 20 to 21,000 troops encamped near the Manassas Junction. I do want to point out a very important woman for the Confederates at this period of time. Her name is Rose O'Neal Greenhow. She is a spy that we're going to talk. I've got an entire portion of one of our lessons on espionage. Rose O'Neal Greenhow had an entire spy ring working in Washington, D.C., and it was like a high society spy ring. They got all their information by attending like cocktail parties and balls and different social events in Washington. And that's how she's going to get her intelligence. And she's going to actually send a ciphered message to Beauregard letting him know that Irvin McDowell's troops are headed toward Manassas Junction. So if you're wondering, how in the world does Beauregard know what's going on here? This is how he gets his information from Rose O'Neal Greenhow here on the left with her daughter. And this is kind of cool. I don't know if I don't know if this is at the Smithsonian or if it's at the Civil War Museum here in Richmond. I'll have to double check, but that's the ciphered message that she sent Beauregard. And we'll talk more, like I said, we'll talk more about how spies communicated information. In fact, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yeah. Yeah, she's involved in that lesson as well. What's that? Yeah, and we're going to talk about some other like really significant female spies on both sides. One in particular that again was located here in Richmond, and she was a notorious. No one realized it until the end of the war. Her name's Elizabeth Van Lew. She was a Union spy, and once that all kind of unfolded, no one attended her funeral, sort of out of protest for her being a Union spy. Her tactics were incredible. We'll get into that a bit later. So, all right. So Joseph E. Johnston has about 11 to 12,000 men in the Shenandoah Valley. their location is in, as I said before, Harper's Ferry. Under his command is a colonel by the name of Thomas J. Jackson, who will be promoted to general. Jackson organizes Virginia units at Harper's Ferry, and he is going to withdraw from Harper's Ferry. And the reason for this withdrawal is because on July 18th, Johnston responds to Beauregard's help. This is a little bit of a sort of like controversial scenario, because if they withdraw, they're going to have to give up Harper's Ferry. And then, more importantly, if they withdraw, there's a pretty good chance they might lose the Shenandoah Valley. And the Shenandoah Valley is really important because it's like the breadbasket of the Confederacy. A lot of supplies, especially foodstuffs, are going to be coming out of the Shenandoah Valley. And a lot of these guys, especially in Jackson's brigade, because he gets promoted from colonel to brigadier general. Well, Jackson's brigade is a lot of those guys are going to be from the Shenandoah Valley. So they answer the call. Jackson leads the march. Stuart's cavalry will sort of be the eyes and ears for the troops being moved, and then the Army of the Shenandoah will be transported from Front Royal outside of Winchester along the Manassas Gap Railroad to Bull Run to reinforce Beauregard. This is the first time in history soldiers are moved by rail into battle, and that is going to be that's going to be a common tactic used by the Union and the Confederacy throughout the war. We're going to talk about how the railroad plays an important part in the war. So that leaves us with the Union commander in and around the Shenandoah Valley. And he's not really even in the Shenandoah Valley. He's north of the Shenandoah Valley, because if you're looking at the northern portion of the valley, Harper's Ferry is just outside of the Shenandoah Valley. You're just getting out of the Shenandoah Valley as you get into Harper's Ferry. And the guy that is going to have that command is General Robert Patterson. He has a force of about 18,000. So again, this is leaving the Confederates a little bit exposed. They're fearful that they're going to lose the valley, because the goal there was to, their position there was to guard the valley, because Harper's Ferry is like kind of one of the northernmost points. There is a term that I want to point out for you guys. If I say the cavalry ran a screen, which I will point out, I'll run back to that. This is kind of like, it's a couple of things. It's scouting to find out troop position, but it also sometimes is used to engage soldiers to try to disrupt troop movements. So cavalry units ran screens like Jeb Stuart ran screens. Some of them were just used for reconnaissance, and some of them were actually aggressive and led to skirmishes and battles. So we'll talk about as I move forward, those screen movements will be explained. All right, so Confederates are going to be transported on July 19th, and they arrive on July 20th. Sorry, this is not the greatest picture. It's the best sketch that I could find of Confederate soldiers loading up on trains to get to the battle. All right, so what happens with Patterson? Maybe you care, maybe you don't. Well, Patterson really kind of gets duped. He does retake Harper's Ferry, as they had predicted would happen, but he doesn't pursue Johnston's force, nor does Patterson take advantage of the wide open door up the valley. And when I say up the valley, we're talking south. We're not talking north. So he could have moved up up the valley without really much resistance at all. The only resistance he would have come across would have been home guard and partisans that would have been trying to defend the valley. But he stays put because he feels that Harper's Ferry is more important. And Harper's Ferry and Winchester, Virginia are going to change hands back and forth throughout the war. I think Winchester changed hands 84 times throughout the war. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And I need to look back. I'll look, maybe you guys can actually look that up for me real quick. How many times did Harper's Ferry change hands? I'm pretty sure the number for Winchester's 84. And there's other situations like that where towns and strategic locations get passed back and forth. So McDowell's plan, 2 divisionary attacks, and 2 of these divisions, we have Tyler's Union Division. It's going to arrive at Stone Bridge. Davies Union Brigade crosses at Blackburn's Ford, as does Tyler's division. So the rest of the army would attack the Confederate left flank, and they are going to take the high ground at Matthews Hill. Who had Matthews Hill? What's the answer? 14 times. Wow, it's incredible. Can you guys double check my Winchester? Well, I think it's 84.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of, yeah, it's crazy.
It's like every day you'd have to like wake up and like look at the courthouse to see the flag is up there.
Exactly. So 14 times Winchester changes hands. All right, so Matthews Hill, take note of that. That will be the high ground for the Union in the first Battle of Bull Run. And to confuse the absolute devil out of you, the positions at the second Bull Run will be completely flip-flopped. So we'll talk about that when we get to 1862. All right, so I've got some maps. You know that I'm into the maps. So I wanted to show you. Here is McDowell's position just outside of D.C. across the Potomac. Beauregard's position along Bull Run Creek and the Manassas Gap Railroad. Johnston's position at moved from Harper's Ferry to Winchester, and then they're going to go by railhead to join the Beauregard's army. Okay, more than 70 times Winchester changed hands. So the attack, all right, the main force, the Union force that crossed the ford is about 1,800, that early force. So it takes them a little too long to get in position. Artillery sets up along Matthews Hill, and the Confederates suspect a ruse and that they are going to attack the flank, which that was the plan. So Confederate brigades, not divisions, but brigades, are going to get into place to try to defend the flank. So Confederate Colonel Shank Evans blocks the flank movement with a small brigade, and other brigades come to aid Shank, but they're pushed back to Henry House Hill. This is going to be the Confederate high ground held on that day, Henry House Hill. Bernard B. In the not early morning, but in the morning portion of the battle, will want to rally his Louisiana troops behind the Virginians who've taken up the defensive position on Henry House Hill, and he will say, look there, there's Jackson standing like a stone wall, rally behind the Virginians. So I actually provided you the exact quote. There's Jackson standing like a stone wall, let us determine to die here, and we will conquer, rally behind the Virginians. Brigadier General Bernard B. We don't know what he meant by this. Is it, look at that valiant man Jackson standing like a stone wall, or did he say, look at that fool standing like a stone wall, rally behind those guys? Because Jackson was like so religious that he didn't get scared in battle. Like bullets whizzing, bombs flying, Jackson stood firm, and as Andrew pointed out before, he tended to keep his left arm up in battle. He thought the blood flow helped him think better on the field. And the Louisiana guys are going to rally with them, and Jackson's brigade of Virginians, which will be renamed the Stonewall Brigade, will hold the line, and this will turn the tide of the battle going into the afternoon. Another pivotal moment here is that due to the all morning into the afternoon fighting, because we're like, you know, it goes into go for it. The Union Army kind of takes a rest, takes a bit of a breather on Matthews Hill from the fighting because they were exhausted. You know, I mean, it's not cowardice. They were, you know, they were just had been fighting all morning, and that is going to give the Confederates. That's going to open up the door for Jackson and the Virginians to attack and take the artillery at Matthews Hill. So, Union or Confederate position at Henry House Hill, Union position on Matthews Hill, Bull Run Creek, and as I said, like this is the morning. This group is going to go in and reinforce Johnston's men, so members of the Army of the Shenandoah. This is that lithograph that I provided for you guys before. Did we already take a look at this? I think we looked at this lithograph. So a lot of confusion on the field. A lot of people wearing blue that day. Confederates aren't wearing gray yet, really. Exactly. That was a big problem. Also on both sides, people wearing the sort of like some form of the Zouave uniform as well.
I have a comment about that.
Yeah.
They changed the Confederate flag as they had from the stars and bars to like the more familiar, you know, with the X pattern. Because I think partially because on the bow you'll see, like if you look on the picture of the stars and bars in the background, it looks pretty similar to the American flag.
Yeah, well, that's that early Bonnie Blue was the one that was the national Confederate flag. That battle flag that we see today, that's actually a Virginia Confederate battle flag that gets adopted later. And we'll talk about some of the flags. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Awesome. All right, so this is, I gotta give credit to one of my good friends, Steve Bailey. Shout out to Steve. He put this map together. How cool is this? This shows you your troop movements. That's the Union engagement in the morning. So these would be Blackburn's Ford and the Stonebridge. This is the Union attempt to hit the flank. This is Shanks Evans. Here's the reinforcements. And then the position on Henry House Hill. Way to go, Steve. All right. He's a little, I got to figure out how to do that. Does anybody know how to potentially teach me how to do that? Like put troop movements on a map? No? All right. Maybe we'll learn that together. All right. McDowell, again, as I mentioned, is going to allow for his men to rest on Matthews Hill. This gives Jackson an opportunity to launch a frontal attack with fixed bayonets. Are we all familiar with the rebel yell? You ever heard that before?
The Right of King's Dominion.
Yeah, well, the Right of King's Dominion, that's awesome. It is actually named, the rebel yell, Right of King's Dominion, is named for this assault that was led by Jackson, and that is a fixed bayonets charge where he said, when you all charge, yell like fury. And the Confederates start screaming, and this sticks. Confederates start this rebel yell, so not just Jackson's men, when other Confederates would attack, they would scream and running into battle. So Jackson is going to attack. Stuart's cavalry will hit the Union flank, and Jackson's men will take the Union artillery on Matthews Hill, and McDowell's forces are now within a musket shot of the Confederates. On the top there, that's Jackson in the field, and that early Confederate flag, as Andrew pointed out. We also have Jackson in his Union uniform. We'll be taking a look at some of the, this is Kunstler painting. We'll be taking a look at a lot of his artwork throughout the war, both Confederate and Union. And then on the right there, that is Jeb Stuart, James Ewell Brown Stuart of Patrick County, Virginia. Both of those guys, West Point graduates. We'll talk more about them in more detail in lesson 6. This is this is 2 p.m. This is the afternoon. That is the movement on artillery positions. At Matthews Hill. All right, so by the afternoon, the rest of the Army of the Shenandoah arrived, so they've got fresh troops. McDowell's flanking column was blunted, crumbled, and broken. Retreat turns into a rout as they're trying to cross back over the Stone Bridge, Blackburn's Ford, any way they can get out of there. There is another very large random problem that occurs here. Politicians and high society from D.C. thought it would be a good idea to pack picnics and come out that day and watch the battle. Yeah. Well, it got a little too real. So during the chaos of the battle, people are trying to get out and cross either fords or bridges during the battle, and all these wagons and carriages wrecked, causing like a log jam, traffic jam, and people can't get back to D.C. Jackson wants to pursue. He wants to march on to D.C. and take advantage of the momentum. But Beauregard wants to hold fast because the soldiers are worn out, and this engagement was far worse than anybody had anticipated, because by the end of the day, you have just under 5,000 casualties, missing, killed, and wounded on both sides. So there's a lot of like logistical problems here. You don't have enough field doctors to take care of the wounded, so there's a lot of really desperate triage going on. Another factor that I want to point out, what do you do with prisoners of war when you're taking hundreds of them? These are all sort of learn-as-you-go moments for the Confederate Army, as it will be for the Union Army as well, because no one had anticipated a battle this bloody early in the war. And almost immediately after this battle, people are going to go back and commemorate the battle, and they're thinking this is going to be the battle to end all battles. This is the bloodiest. But this is just, sadly, it's not a footnote, but it's obviously more important than a footnote. It's the first major battle. Guys, you're looking at battles like Shiloh, where there's just under 20,000 missing, killed, and wounded. Looking at battles like Gettysburg, where there's, just under 30,000 missing, killed, and wounded in a 3-day period. Antietam, 23,000 missing, killed, wounded in a day. The war just gets more and more brutal and gruesome as it grinds on. So hundreds of Union troops, as I said, are scooped up. So I've got a picture of the Stone Bridge for you on the top right, but that's what the Stone Bridge looked like after the battle. there on the bottom is an image of the battle toward the end in the afternoon. And then this is 4 p.m. to dusk. You can see Confederate forces are pushing McDowell's forces back toward Washington. All right, so Beauregard and Johnston do not decide to press, even though Jackson wants to, due to the green soldiers, those being unprepared. As I mentioned, Jackson wants to press on. Both armies were not experienced enough to, deal with the madness and mayhem of the day. McDowell's army straggled back to D.C. McDowell's removed from command. George B. McClellan will gain command on July 26th of what will become known and will continue to be the Union Army of the Potomac. This is a really great quote. This is a letter from McClellan to his wife, Ellen. A little interesting story about that in a second. I find myself in a new and strange position here. President, Cabinet, General Scott, and all deferring to me. By some strange operation of magic, I seem to have become the power of the land. I almost think that were I to win some small success now, I could become dictator or anything else that I might please to be, or that might please me. But nothing of that kind would please me. Therefore, I won't be dictator. Admirable self-denial. There's one thing that George B. McClellan loves, and it is himself. All right? So, McClellan, little Mac, the little Napoleon of the Army of the Potomac, takes control. And I do want you to keep in mind this early primary document, because this sort of, it just kind of like gives us an idea of how much McClellan really thought of himself. And he really was a very popular commander. His men loved it. He was a brilliant tactician. He was a brilliant organizer. But what his downfall was, and we're going to learn about, he was extremely cautious. He was slow to move. He was intimidated by a force that Lee didn't have. So we're going to talk more about that a bit later. And here we have another primary document for you. This is what is called a patriotic cover. It was used on letters and envelopes, and this is a patriotic cover of George B. McClellan, and it says, "Appearance of the son of Pennsylvania in Washington on the morning of January 26, 1861. Why would I pull this patriotic cover for you? Any idea why this would be a big seller and that would be commemorated for the day? July 26th. What day would that be for McClellan? Maybe, I don't know when they got married. It's the day he takes command. Yeah, it's the day that he got his command. So, all right. Yeah, sure. All right.